The content you're about to hear may be graphic in nature. Listener discretion is advised.
Oh, how I wonder what it's like to relax. See the sky down under. Hope my plans collapse. Oh, how I'm under the surface of my tears, falling down asunder the meaning of my years.
This is True Crime XS.
All right, so this is mainly on you. You said you wanted to do an episode where we just talked. I don't have a topic left in 2025. I'm going to go ahead and warn you of that, but I do have something that I can talk about some because it's interesting to me and I didn't know it before.
Oh, that sounds interesting.
But I guess we could talk a little bit about like where the show is headed because we've already started cutting season 7.
Right. So the first year that we did this, we started with Keys.
Right.
And that was really all we had been like planning for, right?
Yeah. We had been so obsessed over that case for so long.
We were like, we have to do something with this.
Yeah, I just had a drive to do something. And it had been kind of ruined because someone else had put out Keys stuff. And then other people have tried since then to put out stuff about Israel Keys that I don't know if people realize how much I had that other people didn't have at the time that I started recording.
I don't think anybody realizes it. And part of it, it's so bad, like we can't even share it, right?
Most of it, like I have the full videos from the Samantha Koenig recovery, and I don't even know why they got sent to me.
It is so bad. Like, it's so bad.
And I had the original ransom photo. I had the walkthrough of Key's house by the Anchorage police, like in the hours after he was arrested in Texas and they got their search warrant.
So the reason that you got that was because of the way I think the files were filed. And so it didn't come from a FOIA, right?
Well, so, okay, I did an FBI FOIA, so I got this huge amount of information. And at one point, I even checked 2 of the other creators for Keys to see what they had gotten. And they had less files than me. And I never really figured out exactly why. But the conclusion I came to was that my original files included a bunch of Anchorage stuff. So to verify that later, I went back and I did a public records request in Texas. I did one in Oklahoma, and then I did one in Alaska. And I kind of recreated within 100 pages the original file dump that you and I were using. And I even compared them. I think True Crime BS and I were probably around the same time FOIAing the same information, doing different things with it. Because I had done a bunch of Washington stuff as well. And I think when I compared, I went on their Patreon just to see if they had different information than I did. And when I totaled up their pages, it was still less. But I had done some stuff related to the fires and the bank robberies. And I think that might have been where I got some of the info.
Right.
But
I think it
had all the graphic stuff from the recovery of the body.
Right. And I think that's where the difference was. I think part of because the Anchorage Police Department files would not have come from the FOIA.
No, they didn't come from the federal, but I think because some of the personnel on scene that because I ordered that first FOIA way before we were going to do this. And I was just shocked at how much it cost. And
I bet it was
a lot
5 years before. I mean, it was a long time before.
Yeah. It was way before we even thought about this. And I had gotten enough that when I looked at it, I realized kind of what you're saying. I think there was some confusion over who was who personnel wise. And so
because of the task
some
force.
things in the original files. Yeah. So, yeah. And it was the task force and then the evidence recovery teams. So the evidence recovery teams were both Anchorage and federal. And I think some of the stuff just got dumped into the Anchorage files. And like, I had some Anchorage files that later were not in follow-up stuff. Like, and if I go on the vault now and look at like what the FBI put out, there's stuff missing that we had from the vault. And I think it was because of the way task force, evidence recovery, and maybe the tip line worked. Maybe they had local tips coming in. And so some of the Samantha Koenig stuff is not in the federal, but it's in the Anchorage.
And so all of that was very enlightening to me over time. It took a long time to for my brain to sort of figure out that like, oh, everybody doesn't have all this information. And why is that? Well, who knows, right? Ultimately, there was some sort of snafu and we ended up with stuff. I know nobody has it. Unfortunately, the reason that I know that is because I feel like other people would have put it out there. And I know it's not out there.
Yeah. And like, there's even been creators since then that I know don't have all of it because somebody made a big deal recently out of the like the posthumous photos of Key's jail cell. I had those. They just weren't worth anything.
No, they're not.
It's just blood on the wall, blood on the floor.
And I had post-traumatic stress after I saw stuff that I thought I wanted to see or I thought would be interesting to see. And I was like, nobody else is ever seeing that by us. Like from us putting it out there because it's terrible.
Well, and I think the difference might have been, so I was not doing anything with media. I was writing about Keys. In my mind, I was going to write this thing. I don't know what it was going to be when I first requested it all, but I was really just doing it for research, not for publication. So when you check through public records requests with local police agencies, sometimes they'll ask you if it's for publication or broadcast or not. And I checked no. And so there was a point in time I wasn't. No, it wasn't a lie. I just originally was not going to do a podcast per se because I hadn't even thought about that. When I'll say it to say this. I had every photo of Samantha Koenig's body recovery, every video of Samantha Koenig's body recovery. I had her full autopsy, all the autopsy photos, which were very, very disturbing. But I also had video of Kimberly, and I had audio of Kimberly. And so this was his girlfriend at the time that this all happened. This was Israel Key's girlfriend. I know that people don't get that now because when I did a later request to Anchorage, just because sometimes I'll do a re-request to see if anything new pops in.
And there was actually
the number of files went down. Yeah, it went down. So when it went down, I realized they had left out the walkthrough of the house that was unredacted, which had it had two sets of files. One was videos of like them going through like everything in the house in Alaska in Anchorage. And then, so there were photos and there were video. And originally I got two versions. One was completely unredacted. And that's how the body recovery came to me too. I got two versions. I got a version that was blurred and then I got a version that was not blurred. But in the house, like all the medications and different drugs and all the things they cataloged, they came two ways. In one way, they like blurbed out like addresses and records, and the other one they didn't. So I have no idea why I got all of that, except that it was for research purposes.
Exactly. And so that opened my eyes about a lot of stuff. Now, to be fair, I listened to all of Keys's like YouTube available on the FBI YouTube page.
Back then, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if they're still available now, but I listened to them ad nauseum and I made notes and I was like, analyzing this guy the way that I
We had
analyze.
so many spreadsheets.
I did, because I needed to know where everything was. And so I would make summaries. And so I had like a searchable spreadsheet. And then, so that was, I remember getting the text from you with like his mugshot. And like, I mean, this was probably
2014?
I think
2013, 2014?
I think it was 2013, and I think it was announcing he was dead. Like
It could be, yeah.
The guy that nobody knows anything about is dead, right? That's what my memory is. And I'm like rolling my eyes at you going, I'm not having this guy live rent free in my head for any amount of time, right? Because what he did was truly alarming. I had a conversation with someone while Samantha Koenig was missing about that situation. Like, just in passing, like, oh my goodness, this 18-year-old girl has been taken and they don't know where she's at. And then shortly, it wasn't too long, where she was recovered and her killer was captured, right? And that was at a time where nobody knew who Israel Keys was. And I remember all that happening in real time. And then, fast forward a year later, you send me the text of his mugshot. And if I recall correctly, it was saying something to the effect of, killer of Samantha Koenig found dead in cell in Alaska, or whatever, something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
And I just was like, ugh, fast forward, it would have been 5 to 6 years later. We had no idea we were about to go into a pandemic. No idea. Because we're leading up, starting, I remember that the Lori Vallow Daybell case, the kids were missing, that showed up while we were, in the middle of doing all this work for our podcast. Do you recall that? That showed up. So that happened in like September of 19, I think. It started being out there that they were looking for these kids. And of course, at that point in time, we had no idea what that case was about. And then a lot of the case going into the podcast, it was structured by you, predetermined sort of how it was going to flow by you. And I had just all this information from his interviews, right? Yeah. Where I had stored it in my head. I had, his timeline. I had the FBI's timeline. I had the timeline that I made based on the other information we had. I had all this stuff. Well, we got through that. And looking back, I feel like our show has evolved over the past 5 years, right? But then we just sort of launched into some other stuff, right? We got to the end.
Yeah, there was some weird stuff that happened at the end of those 20-some episodes.
I mean, things happen. We didn't really know what we were doing. We wanted to talk about it. We got sort of mixed reviews, but I mean, it accomplished what we wanted to accomplish. And we were never about clicks and likes. And at that point in time, and we didn't know we were about to go into a pandemic where everybody and their brothers, cousins, nephew was going to start a podcast, right?
Right.
We had no idea. Anyway, we fast forward. We end that year, if you recall. We did not do a holiday dump that year. We did.
That sounds right.
We did Adam Walsh.
Right, and which I still stand by my research on that case.
We ended up, I don't think there's any question about that at this point. I don't know, actually, but there is no question about this. I came up with what I feel like happened, and then I didn't share it with everybody because it wasn't necessarily true crime. I have thought about that over the years, and I've thought to myself, but think of all the aftermath and how much true crime was involved in that, right?
It changed the shape of so many things in the country that, like, it's very strange to me that ultimately an accident by a friend of the family led to this wild shift in how missing children's cases and later wanted people were it all changed. It changed because of John Walsh.
Everything changed. And I am so baffled by that. That's one of the very first things that happened having to do with our show that made me feel like I was being gaslit by the universe. Because, there was a very specific piece of evidence in the Adam Walsh case that I came upon. And the evidence was that there was a small piece of material found on Adam Walsh's face when he was recovered.
Correct.
Okay. And that led me to my ultimate conclusion. Well, then we did a wrap-up episode instead of telling everybody, right? Do you remember all this?
Yeah, I've told a few people since then that have emailed me or messaged me about it.
Well, sure. And ultimately, I mean, we could tell everybody that's listening because I don't really know. I don't know what all the fallout would be.
So my problem with that was I found a couple of pieces of evidence in that case beyond what you did. And I've always had some public records requests that I do. I know everybody calls them FOIAs. FOIAs are the federal version. You can do FOIAs with some agencies beyond federal. But public records requests are different by jurisdiction. And that area of Florida made me crazy because I dealt with Texas, Alabama, Louisiana, North Carolina, New York, Washington, California. I had dealt with Florida and had pretty good success in getting the records I wanted to get my hands on for so many things to that point. Really just nothing to do with the show at many points, just personal exercises and wanting to know what was going on. I've always worked in different levels of intelligence and investigations in my jobs, and I just wanted to know information.
I think it's funny you say that it has nothing to do with the show because it doesn't directly, but indirectly it has everything to do with the show.
Oh yeah. Now it does. But I was so angry because there were a couple of key pieces of information I needed to we double verify everything for the most part.
Triple verify it.
Yeah, we try to triple verify it. And we had a single source for some information. You had come across this piece of material that was on him, and we were like, oh, that made so much more sense than the stories that were told around the quote unquote conclusion of the Adam Walsh case. So I messaged the police department down there and I started talking to them, and I had somebody that was listening for a minute, and then suddenly they weren't. And
I always going to reopen this case.
I didn't want them to reopen it. I just wanted them to share information with me. So I went around them at that point, and I went to the coroner, and I ended up in this. So what happens, for people who don't know, if you have a FOIA request or a public records request that you put in and it's denied, they have to give you a reason. Depending on the jurisdiction, there's a certain timeline you have to act within. A lot of times you end up having an argument that's sort of quasi-judicial with the state's attorney general's office. And most of this is basically you have to threaten that you're going to sue to get the information. They have to give you a portion of the information. They heavily redact it. There's one or two loopholes where they can kind of shut you down. And weirdly, the one that people think is that there's an open investigation. That's not true. There's always a way around that. You may not get exactly what you want, but depending on how good you are with redacted documents, you can find a source. You can figure out where information came from. You can make a phone call and talk to somebody that'll verify something for you on background. But in the Adam Walsh case, the second thing, well, I guess, it's the second. So the first most popular reason to deny you is it's a sexual assault case. Most places, if it's a sexual assault case, you're just not going to get the information. I did not feel like this was a sexual assault case. They were denying the information. So I kind of skipped around that because the statute or whatever answer they gave me kind of read like, there's a couple reasons we could not give you this information. And they wanted you to think like there's something to do with a sexual assault. But that's not what it is. What it is in Florida, you cannot get information about juveniles. And this is true a lot of places.
As it should be.
As it should be.
Except when we want to know.
Right. And so the reason we couldn't double check what we were looking at or triple check what we were looking at is because some remains had been found in the right time frame that were juvenile remains. And so for those of you who don't know the Adam Walsh story, his entire body has never been recovered.
And we would be looking for a body that did not have a head.
Right. So we felt like these other remains would potentially be or have been preserved in a way that DNA could like be tested. At one point, I volunteered to pay for the testing, and I did talk with one of the assistant chief medical examiners and some other people in the medical examiner's office there, and tried to get the ball rolling, but they shut me down. And the reason they ultimately, quote unquote, won the argument because I don't know that anybody wins, but ultimately it was because Adam Walsh was a juvenile. The remains they had were a juvenile. So in a case like that, you need to open up one side or the other and show something linking the two things. And I couldn't do it because both sides were ultimately juvenile cases.
Right. And so that is where I realized that we were going to suffocate on red tape with that case.
Yeah, we were I pretty quickly figured out there was no amount of money I could throw at it. No amount of money I could raise or borrow or whatever.
And from my perspective, so I found like the file, so to speak, and it was based on a gentleman who I can't remember his name being very certain that Jeffrey Dahmer was responsible for Adam Walsh.
Right.
And which had put that out there as like, look at all this information. And obviously Jeffrey Dahmer's not responsible for Adam Walsh. Jeffrey Dahmer was not a pedophile, right? He had absolutely no interest in Adam Walsh. And, there was factual information indicating he had been in Florida around the time of Adam Walsh's disappearance. Well, that's fine. He still was not responsible for it. When it was announced that they had basically closed the case, and the way that they did that, I had other stuff going on in life that made it not like important to me that they had closed this monumental case that had shifted the trajectory of my life and everybody around my age's life. Right. Yeah. But it came up right after, after we had gone through Keys and we were on that pathway and we ended the year with the Adam Walsh case. But having found myself sitting in the middle of all this information that some, very inquisitive person who really wanted to make a case for Jeffrey Dahmer having been responsible for it, he had put all this stuff out there that I just had free access to, right?
Yeah.
I found myself sort of swirling a little bit because I was going, well, he's motivated, but he's wrong, right? As far as nobody's ever going to convince me Jeffrey Dahmer had anything to do with Adam Walsh's disappearance and ultimate murder, right? And I'm like, I don't know what to do with all this stuff because everybody's going down the right wrong path or the wrong right path or however you want to look at it, right?
Yeah.
No matter what, we know that the way that the case closed was bogus, right?
Correct.
I, for one, am like, what are you doing, John Walsh? Right. Okay. So that was 5 years ago now. That was the wrap of the first season of our show. We didn't do a holiday, any sort of holiday, anything, except we had a episode where we talked about everything that had happened. And now, after letting that simmer all these years, and ultimately, my conclusion is I don't know that we'll ever have the weight behind us to do anything about it. I don't know.
No, I think so. Here's the weird part about it, and the reason that like it still comes up. There's this guy Rick Stone that gets involved. He's the one who ultimately like goes with what John Walsh wants, which is the case closed in I think 2008.
Yeah, that's right.
And I I'm pulling this from memory, so if I get some of it wrong, I apologize. But ultimately, what we wanted was to point out to them that in their evidence lockers, like if they were to like put things together between the Hollywood Police Department and the FDLE and the medical examiner's office, they actually have under different file numbers from different dates for very different reasons, all of the evidence sitting there. Like there's this weird reconstruction they did of a quote unquote accident. There's these bones that are found. There's like, they seem completely unrelated, but I am relatively certain if you were to test between the three case files, you would actually know exactly what happened to Adam Walsh, but it is a far less interesting story than the crazy confessions killer killed him.
Right, because those guys really didn't. I mean, I think they killed one person, or one of them killed one person.
We think they were involved in some deaths, but ultimately, as far as quote unquote murder, it was more like neglect than it was like straight up.
They were absolutely not serial killers.
Right.
They were milking that position for everything it was worth, but they were not serial killers.
But what bothered me the most about it all was like, so either at that point, law enforcement is like playing the game, like closing the book.
They just don't care.
Or they don't care, or they've been bamboozled by like two fairly low IQ manipulative goobers.
But there's the people who have manipulated the goobers. They had a different prerogative than law enforcement did. Law enforcement's prerogative was like, I don't want this on my watch. Like through the various chiefs of police or what have you. Now, the other thing that comes into play here for me personally was all of a sudden, America's Most Wanted is back.
Yeah.
And I'm going, you've got to be kidding me. It will not die, right? Now, granted, America's Most Wanted has done a lot of good things, okay? It has been, it ushered in the era of pre-social media true crime, right?
I would say, yeah.
Okay.
Between America's Most Wanted
and
cops. Yeah.
Okay. And Unsolved Mysteries. All right. Yeah. So you got to keep in mind, this is coming from my perspective. So I have this huge epiphany from literally it was out of nowhere. And I realized this huge case that's always been this like, I don't know, the back of my mind, there's always been a thing about Adam Walsh because his kidnapping and decapitation and finding his head, it skewed my entire life. Okay.
Yeah, there was this whole missing child panic that was very similar to Satanic Panic that came out of all of it. And like, it definitely changed the lives of elementary students from 1981 to, I would say, about 1995. Like, it really changed like how those kids were raised, even though Adam Walsh, if he were alive today, would be several years older than me.
Right, exactly.
But it still affected my life.
Oh, just tremendously. And all this is happening, and from my perspective and this show's perspective, which is why we're talking about it. And then I'm thinking to myself, I don't know what to do with this, right? I never in a million years, starting with Israel Keys, okay, a guy who I was determined not to have live rent free in my head, because he is literally somebody that if I had met him, I probably would have been friends with. And it was very bothersome that he was a serial killer, right?
I don't know that I would have been friends with him, but I
You
probably
would not
would have
have
known
been.
him. I would have known him through
Me.
either you or like a couple of other people in my life probably would have been right up his alley, either from work or sports connections, I'm
Well,
sure.
I can say without question, he's not somebody I would have dated. Okay. Like,
Right.
he's not the type of guy that I would have been interested in. However, he's the exact, I'm friends with, like, in the sense that, like, if I come upon you in a social circle, we're never going to be close enough for me to know anything about you that I'm not going to want to be friends with you. Right.
Right.
That's just how it is. But he is right down the alley. I'm telling you, there's so much about him. Having like a weird upbringing where he was like homeschooled instead of like mainstream public school or even private school, like all those things. I have so many people in my life just like that. He's only about 2 months older than my husband. Okay. Like the extreme religious background, like all the different things that we learned about Keys. I know if I had encountered him that I would have been at least acquaintances with him, if not friends. Okay. I do feel pretty solid, though, that he was not the kind of guy I would have dated. So that's comforting, I guess. I don't really know. But so that kind of thing, I'd never experienced in real time a person who could have altered the course of my life. Okay. Not that I wanted him to, but I also was in, this is the worst part about this, at various times in the single digit 2000s. I don't really know how to say that yet, but let's say 2009. I was in various places in upstate New York, very close to where his house that he ultimately owned is located. And I would frequently stay for 5 or 6 day stretches of time in an RV that I never locked.
Well,
and that was horrifying, right? I mean, just think of how that plays into that whole story.
I mean, I think so. This actually all ties together. So I had an affinity for missing persons cases. And like, I think I was always looking at missing persons cases. And I think you were also doing that. And sometime back in like 2011 or 2012, you and I started talking about this one missing persons case. And I don't know if you remember, we came to this mushroom hunter thing back then.
Right.
And we were looking at this West Virginia case by text message because, like, I worked somewhere else and you didn't live in the same place you did. And, like, so that's when we started talking about all this stuff. But I have to say, even then, I was really angry about all things that came out of Texas. Do you remember?
Yeah.
This over time? And I'm bringing this up for a couple different reasons. One is, so the Adam Walsh case is closed by a guy named Rick Stone, who most of the time was working in Texas and weirdly working for departments that at different times I have demanded information from and butted heads with. So at one point he becomes, for a very brief period of time, the police chief for Hollywood, Florida. And that is a strange time where he's looking at the Adam Walsh case. I already know him to be the type of person that he has to talk about his accolades because he's covering up a lot of things he ignored. And if you had a good conversation with him, I'm positive, I have never done that. I'm positive that like he would have, like, we only have so many resources, we only have so much time type stories. He retired from the Hollywood Police Department after only being there for 3 years. And I say all of that because he is now back in Texas. And he's back with the Dallas, Texas Police Department. I think he's working as a division commander again. He is considered to be, at one point, like their most decorated officer.
Do you think that it was by design that he went to Hollywood?
100%. He was always, so he probably still has it up. I haven't looked at it in a long time. So if I'm wrong and people want to call me out on it, truecrimexcess@gmail.com is the place to call me out on things. I think he still has like this website. At one point it was like Angel Fire, like the old type website. And it's like chiefrickstone.com. And he was really trying to sell a book. And he had everything he'd ever done on there. Weird thing about that is a couple of places in Texas, but among them Dallas, I have found to be lacking in all of the things that a good police agency should be. Primarily because of leadership. And he appears to be, at different times in key leadership positions. He likes accolades. He likes titles. He likes patting himself on the back. He wants Hollywood to tell his story one day. And he would have to tell the truth for that to happen. He would have to be like, look, here's the things I ignored. Here's what I lied about. And if he did that, Hollywood would tell his story.
Hollywood, California.
Yeah, like the Hollywood, the industry.
Right, but he went to Hollywood, Florida by design.
Right, by design. I don't know why he goes down there.
I think he went to close the case.
I think that's really what happened, which is weird because like all the problems with Otis Toole and Henry Lee Lucas come from Texas.
Don't you think, though, that it benefited John Walsh to have this case closed because he was the moving force behind America's Most Wanted, and his son's case lingered?
I think that's why they did it. I think ultimately, like the reason they did it, because that is a weight to carry when you have because they tout these numbers. I saw when America's Most Wanted came back out, I think they had Paul Holes on there or something. They talk about the number of fugitives they've caught, missing persons they found, and a lot of that, just the stuff that makes headlines is just garbage. Like it's there to get our attention and to be this.
It is, but at the same time, I just can't say too many bad things about it because it was an effort, right? It was an effort at a time where that wasn't happening.
I'm not knocking the effort. Okay. I agree with you. I'm knocking the overstating our accolades kind of position, which is how we end up here.
Right. And I don't like that coming from anybody. I can't stand a press conference that starts with a whole bunch of thanks to people that they were doing their job. I mean, really?
Yeah. And I have to say, though, you did not give me a topic or a script for this show. And I did not give you a topic or a script for this show. So this next part is probably going to annoy you since I talked to you about this like a month ago.
Okay.
I am going to point out that here's how bad it's been in Texas. And this ties to Adam Walsh, but it doesn't. I am still hunting 3 cases in Texas that I genuinely have been able to get zero information on. No matter how many letters I write, how many arguments I have by email with the Attorney General's office. And one of them stems from Dallas. And another one doesn't, but it's this case that it's very important. And it's important for some weird reasons. But what's interesting is we're going to do something in January we haven't done before. And that is we're going to have some of our old episodes. I think it's 1.5 episodes are going to pop back up in the feed with some new information with someone that we got close to about a case. Did you say it was 2022?
I think so.
So weirdly, it's going to tie back to the Dallas Police Department, but we're going to be talking about an older case, and we're going to be talking about an older case, and then we're going to be using that information to kind of update people on the case, but also the process that family members go through related to cold cases.
That is enough to kill anybody.
Yeah, and there's
And
somebody that we wanted to revisit and re-bring up that case.
and
So that's going to come up in January. Sorry.
honestly, those the families, we've actually talked to quite a few family members on the show, and like if I could wave a magic wand to make it happen for somebody, it would be those family members, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And that is something that is, this has been a process because we did a research project essentially. We
we did.
we did a research project that we were doing it anyway all along. We do this constantly. I don't know what's wrong with us, but we do these things, and we decided we were going to showcase this particular one. I think for me, it was more of all the information we had with regard to Keys's interviews and everything.
Yeah.
But it just expanded. We got to see what's being done, what's not being done. How do we want to do this? We are in, I have 50% control and you have 50% control of this, gigantic research project that we're still doing on various cases. But we got to consume so many different aspects and we got to see so many different things. And the biggest thing for me has been, and we've talked to families that things have never even come out, right? Because we just can't quite wrangle it in enough to get it onto the show. But when you're talking with someone who has felt the firsthand implications of the terrible crimes that have happened in some of these cases, it is no longer entertainment, right? It is as real as it possibly can be. And it makes me really dig in and try. And unfortunately, that doesn't seem to matter.
Yeah, I mean, so this next year, which I'm kind of segueing, we're going to bring back on a family member. There's a new family that I've talked to some over the last 2 years that I'm still working on their case. They have a very interesting case. I've had trouble getting the information. It's down in one of those southern states, but it is a wholly fascinating case. One of them reached out to me 1.5 years ago, and I started digging into that case and doing background work on it. That's going to come up in the new year. There is an alleged serial killer's wife that I have told I will give her airtime and I will talk to her. I'm not going to, we have said some things that they don't like, and I will bring them on the show because I am interested in the possibility that something is wrong with that case. Sure. I'm interested. It's a lot of work to do that, but I'm willing to tell their side of it and swing back around. I have multiple serial killer stories that are part of the new year that I've sent you books, at least 1 or 2 books. I know you've gotten one. I don't know if the second one's arrived. That'll be part of the new year. We have tons of dirty badge cases to cover. Dirty badges. We've decided that we're going to keep doing this because people keep listening to it. We had a tremendous number of responses by email and by messenger over the holiday season. So thank you to everybody who listened and who reached out there. We are going to be, I'm trying to cover a specific case in Texas. I have 3 there that I will till the end of time wonder about. We talked about another case in Texas that I think the kid finally had resolution. It was one you and I were very interested in that may come back up this year. When we do this, I don't know that I would share this. Most of what we share here is the verifiable version of our text message chain for the year.
Sure.
Because I already planned the holidays for 2026.
Yes, that is a structured event. It has, I'm in all of your planning capabilities and the fact that I do quite a bit of work, but I can't say that I'm really involved in the planning except for showing up when I'm supposed to. And then I edit, but we actually pulled it off.
Yeah. This was and I guess you wanted this to be more chat-like for the end of the year. this was a particularly hard year for me. I I lost a dog that I had forever, first thing this year, and it messed me up. Weirdly, like I had this pair of bonded dogs for many, many years. Uh, my wife and I had them, and we had lost one a couple years ago, and we actually thought that we would lose the one we lost this year, like right before that. But this is a dog that you have known since they were very small. I think one year she knocked over your Christmas tree.
Oh, yeah.
Uh, and
And obviously, all of our listeners, well, I don't know, but all of our listeners, if you've listened consecutively, we try to keep we keep the banter down, but we both love dogs.
yeah, yeah. There's like between us, we have a lot
We
of
have
dogs.
a lot of dogs. I have 5 dogs that are all rescues. One showed up on my doorstep, literally.
But so I lost a dog this year that like it threw my whole year off. My wife and I have this massive construction project that's been ongoing. We started planning it 2 years ago for a specific reason. We had a family member I felt like might need a space, and I incorporated that. So the other thing that happened was, so I'm married to a twin, and when you're married to a twin, you don't always choose all the things in your life the way you might if you're just married to like a
Person with a sibling.
yeah, like it's different than a sibling. Yeah. And I've been married for a long time to this person, with her even longer. So you get close to the twin, and the twin was also married. And I was very close with her husband. And last year, he had a pacemaker put in. And we're young. We're not the age that you should get pacemakers, but he had a specific thing going on where he had a childhood heart problem. And he had a corrective procedure when he was very young. They did not expect him to live very long. So the fact that like he's in his 40s was kind of a miracle. And we knew like the pacemaker was going to give him some time before he had to have a heart transplant. So he had the pacemaker put in because some things weren't going well. And this is, somebody I travel with everywhere with our wives and our families. And the pacemaker procedure didn't go well. It was supposed to give him another decade, and then that decade was going to be a time when, like, we all started talking in our late 50s about, like, next steps on that, and we knew he was going to need a heart transplant. That was the idea behind him getting a pacemaker. So he was admitted early part of the year, I think in March. And they were trying to figure out a corrective procedure for the pacemaker. And they came to us and said, oh, we can't do anything. Instead, we're going to skip ahead to the transplant part, which, because of the procedures that had gone on so far, he wasn't really in the shape that he needed to be in for the transplant, health-wise. But it was the only option to save his life. So they were going to do a double transplant, his heart and another organ. And they were waiting for a match on that. And they got a call in June that they'd found a perfect match. He's a big guy like I am. I'm well over 6 foot and a fairly hefty person. So he's a little older than me, not a lot. Anyways, they found a match, and he had a double organ transplant in late June, and he did not make it. He did not survive the recovery process, and it took its toll on our families and all the things going on. And obviously, his wife is still here, and being married to the wife's twin, like a lot fell on my wife through the summer, and you and I had to kind of plot how we were. Like I had everyday job stuff going on, and then we had the regular show that we were trying to keep up with, plus the research that goes into the regular show, and then we were sorting out the Christmas process.
Right, which we just successfully finished.
We did, yeah. Everything.
But it was a very hard year. That was it. You know, obviously, it's not my brother-in-law, but
I guess. Yeah.
I feel like I felt the weight of all that for you, and you know, I'm sure our listeners. It's a tragic story. It's a terrible story. It was unexpected.
Yeah.
And, you know, sometimes life is just happening and it's just coming at you and you just have to keep going, right?
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, what's next? Except we don't ask that because we will find out what's going to be next. And
right.
It was a terrible loss. And I felt that for you. And I'm sure anybody listening, you know, we're all very sorry for your loss.
Yeah. I mean, that was just like, sort of it became a milestone year, whether I wanted it to or not, you know?
Well, right. Because I mean, he was a close family member, a very close family member of yours. So it wasn't like somebody, you know, distant passed away. This was somebody that was in your day-to-day life.
Right. Right. And he has, you know, college age kids, and there's a whole set of things that happens in the world where you get some freedom back when your kids go to school. So he was just about to get to enjoy that part. And so it was rough on everybody, but we did keep up the schedule for getting all of our stuff done. And then I was just telling you about this today, and I guess you didn't know this part. So they had a dog, and like the dog belonged to the girls and to him and to his wife. And the dog is turning 17 years old and also ends up passing away like 2 months later. So it's been a particularly rough year for the wife.
To me, I'm going, oh my goodness, what else could possibly happen? I'm pretty sure you omitted that to me on purpose.
Yeah, I left it out because, well, there's just so much happening at one time. One, you don't always remember. Like I finally took a week off in like August. I took a week off and I just went with them to two girls, and we went to the beach, and meaning the two girls being my wife and her sister. And then I think the others joined us later in the week. But the bottom line was we needed a little bit of a break. And I've never felt closer to like just needing a break from the podcast. I try to keep everything together so that there's like lots happening out in the future, recorded and done. So if anything does happen, we don't have like major issues or have to take a huge break or anything. I did like, it's weird because this year, the longest break that I took, which sounds selfish, was because my dog died. And I sort of knew that was going to happen.
We started getting, like, people were wondering if we were gone.
What happened? Yeah.
I don't think that that's going to happen. I feel like we would let people know. But if the show disappears, one of us died, more than likely. That would be my guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think I could probably make you live on an AI at this point.
Possibly. I would not be doing that, though.
Yeah, I've tried that. I've tried like the AI voice thing. It works a little bit, but it's like not quite there yet. I've experimented with it on other projects. And the other thing that happened was I had tons of real life investigation stuff going on with work, and that was like that's not something that we've been. Yeah, we're not able to talk about that because of confidentiality. So we don't get to include that in the show.
Well, and see, I'm sitting over here a lot of times. To be completely honest, with the holiday stuff, we did 25 episodes, Hostage for the Holidays. We recorded it throughout the year. And then I edited it. And you did like the finalization and you dropped it in the feed. And so I recorded it. I did the edits. And then as they were coming out, I eventually listened to every single episode. And like just as a sort of an illustration of how like crazy everything is, it was like a new show every single step of the way there. Like I got to hear it again. And so it was really great. I really enjoyed the hostage episodes. I thought they were fantastic. And sitting and looking back on the year, I like pat myself on the back thinking to myself like, wow, I can't believe we stayed on track because, you summed it up kind of eloquently in sort of a, where you're trying to give information, but not like completely, take everybody down with you. But like you say it that way, but as it was happening during the year, it was like, what else can possibly happen? Right. And we kept on track. And to me, that just shows, I love doing the show. I love our show. I love everything about it. I love how it progressed. I remember one of the biggest things that was one of my fears was that like we would never be able to fill an hour's worth of time, which is hilarious to me now because we can talk for 2-3 hours, right? No problem. And it's just the back end of editing that. But I feel like we've accomplished, we didn't know what exactly we were doing. We had this research and information we wanted to put out there for people. And then we were sort of like, okay, well, now what? Well, there's endless content out there, right?
Right.
And we try to be selective and we try to, like, we have absolutely no desire to be getting, clicks and likes about repeating something somebody else has already done. I
tried to avoid that completely.
We're not interested in the least in doing that. And I feel like we've actually accomplished this like completely unset out goal, I guess. We have absolutely no point like that we were aiming for, except we've surpassed it.
Yeah. I'll say this, so I always had the theory, and I've told you a certain number, it's always been the same number. I said, if we get to that, I feel like podcasting will have come completely back around because it's doing this thing right now where everybody's like deep into video and like, it's not good. And it's not as entertaining when you have to like watch something that you really just want to listen to. And I've always felt like it would do that. And I've sort of set a couple of milestones along the way. We stayed ad free for the most part. Like I did throw some things in for like when we were originally with Anchor, I would do their little thing. Cause you get like some credit towards the services you use when you do that. We've had people approach us and say, hey, come be part of this network. All you have to do is whatever. And I've always turned it down, even with money attached to it, because you had said from the beginning we would be 50-50 and like you wanted to maintain that control because you felt like you would do better work. But if we started doing something where there was a lot of the business side was on us, that you were going to have to focus on that. And I've always appreciated that you said that. And I've kept it ad free, except for some of the money that was put up originally. That's where Labrati's came in, because that's like the original starting cost of this were either hours, like mine and yours, or they came from Labrati's just because they wanted to see how the process worked. And we did that with like just a small amount of money and just a lot of research. Like I put way more money into the show in terms of like copies and requests and fees than I would ever get back out of it. And I did not want that to then be in the control of another person because of what you had said.
Right. And
so we kept it that way.
As soon as I am not putting out what I want us to put out, I'm not going to be interested in doing it anymore. That's just my personality. Every single thing like that we put out there, we own it. Like the good, the bad, the ugly, the indifferent. It's all of our responsibility. And I take, and that's the other thing. I take responsibility for it too. I am not above saying I was wrong, right?
Yeah.
I have no problem saying I was wrong about stuff. Things that come up, I feel like it's always well-grounded in thought. That doesn't mean that it's got to be right.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, 100%. Like I will apologize even, when I'm wrong. And it's interesting how in the short 5 year, I mean, I don't know if that's short or long. In the 5 years that we've been doing this, we've had several things go full circle, right?
We have, and I think some of that's going to come up in the new year because certain things have closed out completely now. We've watched certain cases close. Is that what you mean?
Well, I mean, the thing that sticks out in my head was Ellen Greenberg.
Yeah, we've now. Oh man,
that's like a whole thing. Maybe we shouldn't get into that here, but that went. We covered that. It was sort of like, well, this is the information we have. It's possible some of that information changed. I'm still not entirely sure. At the end of the day, it's still a suicide.
Yeah.
It is one of the most heart-wrenching cases. And I can tell now that became mainstream this year because there was I think it was a docu-series with a couple episodes, maybe 3 episodes. So that hit mainstream streaming. And I saw it and I was like, I didn't see anything new. And I was thinking to myself, I get a pit in my stomach because I realized there's a lot of controversy around that case. And I don't want to be the person standing there being like, I understand all that, but the evidence is still showing she killed herself, right? And it's not an argument to be had, right? If I got evidence that there was something else to this, I would relent. I would say, sure, I see that, right? In fact, at some point, I thought there was going to be something, but there's not.
Yeah, I'm not getting into Ellen Greenberg. I think that people are wrong about that. And Ellen Greenberg's case is an example of why you don't let, it's weird to say this from my perspective. There are just cases out there where you have to kind of go with what the professionals were originally looking at in terms of the medical examiner and how they were dealing with the case. If it's super wrong and it resulted in a conviction, you fix it. But it is very difficult to sit down and try and change a case. And there's several cases out there like that. One of the people I'm hoping to talk to this year, we had them on the show. They had written a book and we had them on the show. And I wanted to talk to them about another case, but now their case that they were on the show about is wrapped up and it was not the results they expected. So I definitely want to have them back on.
And that happens,
Yeah. That happens more than you realize. We're lucky because we haven't had to do a ton of engagement to keep the size audience that we have.
It's not that we don't want to engage with everybody. It's just it's a delicate line, and that's part of the reason why I wanted to do this episode was just to sort of talk a little bit to the audience as opposed to just tell a story. But it's delicate because while I have appreciation for every single person who likes us enough to continue listening to us, when I engage in banter conversation with people about case topics, right? It's draining, right?
Yeah.
And it's already so hard when you're talking about these literally death cases, right? To then defend your position or defend the professional's position or engage in more conversation about it. And even you and I, the two of us together, as great of a team as we are, we come to not blows, but we come to explosive arguments over things at times. And, they don't make them into it. It doesn't make it into the show anymore, but it's just a delicate process, right? And so it's sort of because it is just the two of us, we can't hire a social media coordinator. I love hearing from listeners and I love hearing whatever it is any listener that takes the time to listen to us has to say, like, good, bad, indifferent. I like hearing about it. The problem is to have the bandwidth to engage. Like, I can either do the show or I can engage about the show. I don't have enough to go around, if that makes sense. And, it's purely selfish on my side of it because in a way I just put stuff out there. I wish we could have more engagement and, talk one-on-one with more people. It's just, if we want to keep doing the show, there's only so many hours in the day, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of, we've had to focus on certain things. And essentially for this show, what I've focused on is the research and the work. I hear occasionally from you about something, and most of the time I just put it in the back of my mind and I keep it in mind, but that's that, right? And so it's a weird balance. And we have absolutely, now we have experience in it, but we had no background in any of this stuff. We just started doing it, right?
Yeah, I don't know how to explain to people like the weird skills we put together to make the storytelling process work, and then to also do the research that we do with the stories. Like it's kind of strange how it all worked, and like
it's so much work.
It is a lot. And that's the other thing is we could just do the main cases that people do. I never found that all that interesting. There were a few of them we touched on over the years that like I get a little obsessed with trying to figure out something new.
Well, we do the true crime news, which usually will hit the high notes of things, right?
Yeah.
I feel like going through things that happen, especially like the huge cases, right? That especially when there's movement and like we talk about it in true crime news and then we move along, right? We're not going to beat something to death, pardon the pun, but some things, there are big things happening. Now, I'm pretty sure you sent me a link this morning that one of the cases that we've covered several times in true crime news is actually going to go to trial and there's going to be a camera, right?
Oh yeah. That one, I don't know how I'm going to work that in because like I had all this stuff planned for January and February. And now I'm seeing that and I'm going, okay, well, how are we going to do that? Because we may do some coverage of that as it happens.
Interesting case. You have made it interesting for me. I'm not going to lie. It wouldn't have hit my radar, but because it did, it's interesting. And I will be there. I am still not entirely sure that it's not going to be resolved before it goes to trial.
It may. You could be 100% right on that.
It honestly should be resolved before it goes to trial. There's not a whole lot to be had at trial, honestly, based on what we know. There's a literal co-defendant, right?
Yeah.
That's talking. And
I can't wait to see like how all that goes down because like it's a weird case and like I don't think it's getting the coverage it should, which is why I keep talking about it. Because
I'm actually not aware of how much coverage it's getting, but it should be getting coverage. It's horrifying. The whole thing is, and it should be a main case.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with that. But you wanted to do a chat episode. We're doing a chat episode, and I would say I have contributed as much as I can to that. Well, I don't know how to do this part, unfortunately. That having been said, like the whole new season, we are going to repeat a couple of things that we're doing. Like episodes we covered in the past, we're coming back around and talking to family members again. There's an author that I mentioned in this earlier that I'm trying to talk to her. I originally had reached out to her about another case altogether, but now there's an update in what we had episode wise. So we'll probably play that episode again and have her back on to talk about the update. Because she's still involved in a couple of really interesting sort of high profile cases. There's a serial killer that she's gone really deep into, and I'd like to have a conversation with her about that. I do think the family member episodes are important. I mentioned that we're looking at a missing persons case, but the thing I didn't have on my 2025 into 2026 bingo card is that, and you and I've tried to cover this case. Like, we brought it up season 1 up front. We talked about it later on. It's a case that's bothered me. And I think, like, I remember really being interested in this case, like, while this case was first making the news and how wild it was.
You were so interested, and I absolutely refused. I was like, not today, Satan.
Yeah. And I think once I realized that this case was also in the original Israel Keys files that we had, which somebody has done an interesting like OCR version where you can go search the vault files. And I will note that, like, the vault files are still, I looked it up, 916 pages short from what you and I originally had. So that means not everything is in there, but most of it is. It's like 4,000 pages worth of stuff you can go through. But this case was in there. And, like, I had this weird thought, like, in terms of thoughts, it's like, it's just me being really like a nosy person and like doing a lot of critical thinking. Like, I always wondered, why did Keys have this case in there? And I had, like, I've gone through all the different ways you could potentially tie him to this. He's, in my opinion, not tieable to this. It's too far a stretch.
Hey, if I could have made this work, I would have.
Right. Yeah. And I think you and I had looked at it, and, like, it made for sort of entertaining semi-clickbait. We didn't go that far with it. We just talked about it because it was definitely in the browser on his computer. It came up as one of the sets of recognized files where they were doing the facial recognition from the stuff in his browser, and they were kind of comparing it against Namus. I think they ended up doing some news searches on that later to do some more further comparisons. So we know she was in there, and then it kind of dies for us because, like, we weren't able to fully rule him in for anything related to it. And then we started ruling him out, and we were like, yeah, this doesn't make a lot of sense. But I did wonder, like, does he recognize, like, another version of himself out there? And I think I'm overthinking it at that point.
Oh, no, I think that you're right.
Well, so the case that we're talking about that, like, makes its way back into the bingo card is Holly Bobo. So the disappearance and murder of Holly Bobo was a huge deal for me. I've talked about it here and there on the episodes that we put out, like, since then, because, you know, there's a trial, there's all these people put forward, there's this story that's told, and, like, it is very difficult to get people to understand how much it's wrong. And so you and I had even read a book by one of the TBI agents, and I had considered reaching out to him. And at one point, I think you and I had taken the original trial. It's multiple days, and we had started
about 9 days, I think.
Yeah, like, if you look at the original trials, like motions, opens, closings, it's 9 or 10 days, and we had gone through it and tried to figure out a way to make it into something for either our feed or its own feed, because we had considered that it was, like, pretty disturbing how wrong the prosecution in Tennessee got the trial case. And, like, it kind of sounds like you're defending a murderer if you try and talk about it that way. But I've noticed that people have started coming around to that. And so in 2025, one of the things that happened is there was this petition and a series of motions for appropriate relief and post-conviction relief that were done on behalf of Zach Adams, who is sort of the ringleader of that. If you can,
he's the only one that went to trial.
Well, right, but he's considered the ringleader in terms of somehow being involved in spearheading the abduction and murder of Holly Bobo. And it never made sense to us, because in my opinion, that's a single person crime. best case
100%.
scenario, you might have two people involved, but one is like tangentially involved with like some kind of accessory charges either before or after the fact. And they tell this story on the stand, and it's hours and hours long. If people want to go down the rabbit hole, it's the testimony of a guy named Jason Autry, who basically his testimony gets him sort of off in that case, but like he had so many other things going on in his back in prison already. But
he was looking at a situation where he was going to prison anyway. He was either going to get thrown under the bus or he was going to throw somebody else under the bus.
Right. And so he tells this story because they basically gave him the discovery in that case. And like he tailors a pretty interesting story.
With the help of his investigators and his attorneys.
Right. But I will tell you, I never bought what he was saying. One, because he just was openly displaying signs of lying on the stand.
Well, and at one point during the trial and his testimony, he says, I couldn't rehearse that.
Right.
In response to something that he was asked. He's like, how could I rehearse that? And that's a weird thing to say about your testimony, right?
Right. So the rabbit hole that you and I are currently down, and the reason I bring up this case at all, is now that it's like going through, I think it's on its fifth leg of like these PCR hearings, so post-conviction relief hearings.
Right. And that's after they've already gone all the way to like the Tennessee Supreme Court for help and that it's all been denied, right?
Right. And what they're focused on, and just in terms of like the hearings they're having, is sort of whether or not there was ineffective assistance of counsel, whether or not there was like some kind of egregious type of prosecutorial misconduct. The prosecutor in that case has gone on to be a judge.
Which is horrifying. It is absolutely horrifying.
And that's the rabbit hole we're down. And you can join us in that rabbit hole. We're going to talk about this a little bit, but like you can like see what we're talking about. It's taken place in 5 separate chunks because it's like taking place in parts. So it's not all back to back. I think Trial and Error podcast YouTube channel had some of it. Law and Crime had some of it. Somehow this is not a bigger deal.
I want to point out Trial and Error is actually with Dr. Spirko, who has largely been a huge part of the post-conviction relief. She's one of the co-hosts that gets subpoenaed by the state, and then her attorney takes over the rest of the podcast because she has been silenced by the state of Tennessee.
Yeah. So you know a little bit more about her background. Like, can you synopsize what she does?
Sure. She is an expert who Doug Bates calls Dr. Katie Spirko often in his child custody cases. He specializes in divorce, family law in a different part of Tennessee. He was appointed to Zach Adams post-conviction relief by the court after Zach Adams filed a pro se petition that the court found had enough merit to appoint him counsel.
Okay? Yeah, and I'm not trying to get away from her for a second, but the all this comes about because Jason Autry, at some point speaking with Zach Adams, like former counsel and parts of...
It was with it was with Dr. Spirko.
He basically says none of what I said was true.
Right. Dr. Spirko went in to interview him as a neuropsychologist and as part of Zach Adams' post-conviction relief stuff.
For some reason, I thought his previous attorney was also involved in that.
Oh, you mean Jennifer Thompson?
Yeah, Jennifer Thompson.
She's still involved.
Right, but at this point, there's another lead defense counsel. She is
not his counsel anymore, but she testified how she was ineffective assistance of counsel.
Right, and that's to keep the hearing going and get more information out there.
Jennifer Thompson fully believes that Zach Adams is innocent and that the only way he was convicted was because she was ineffective.
Right.
And so she's willing to get on the stand and say that because of what she examined, he wasn't guilty.
Right. And so what's interesting about all of this is you're seeing all the players now have to either defend themselves or admit that like there were some problems going on. And I will just like, this was the focal point for me, and you pointed it out to me, because we've watched like everybody testify. Zach Adams testifies, Dylan Adams testifies, all in these post-conviction hearings. But the most interesting thing to me was the former prosecutor in this case is named Jennifer Nichols. She is Judge Jennifer Nichols now. And she should have fought this subpoena until the judge just didn't want to talk to her anymore. Because when she gets on the stand, she is like everything you hear about prosecutors, but you don't want to believe is true. And
she had the absolute worst attitude of any person on the stand I've ever seen. She objected to the defense attorney, Doug Bates, asking her certain questions while she was sitting in the witness seat.
Yeah, and the problem with her, like if you don't do anything else with this rabbit hole but go watch her testimony, I'm pretty sure Trial and Error put it up. You should, and the reason that you should watch it is not because of her attitude. Like her attitude makes it actually pretty difficult to watch, but it's because listening to her words, you realize that like, while she is a terrible jurist, she was put in the untenable position of prosecuting something that she knows, and you can tell by how she's sitting on the stand, she never in all of the testimony she gives puts together that she actually had any kind of clear understanding of the evidence in that case.
In fact, she says she didn't.
Yeah, so that part alone should terrify everybody. And look, when it comes to the whole A-train theory of nonsense related to these 4 kids having abducted and killed Holly Bobo, I've never really been on board with it. It's always been like a situation that I look at and I go, these kids, like, if they're doing what you're describing, they're not capable of doing what you're describing. And it just depends on which part of the story you want to believe. And we have to believe in whole cloth. There was a couple things that you pointed out to me as we've been talking about this recently that I want to make sure that like I say out loud. Credit to you. One of them is like, in order for the Bobo family to be on board with Holly Bobo having been involved with all of this and Jason Autry's story being at least enough to make this seem truthful, you have to believe that Clint Bobo was going to learn how to make meth that day, and Holly wasn't supposed to be home, and that they arrived prior to her leaving for school, and like that doesn't hold water.
Which is one of the things that really didn't make sense to me. One of my holdbacks on doing this case, and I think I stated it outright in a former episode where we grazed on this. I think I said something to the effect of, I'm not really in the business of trying to convince a family who feels like they got justice that they didn't, right?
Right.
And it's true. But one of the things you'll find is, and for whatever reason, people don't realize this, Jason Autry said that the reason they were there was to teach Clint Bobo how to make meth, and she came out raising hell, so they took her.
Which is ridiculous.
Right. And Clint Bobo saw who took his sister, and nobody bothers to say which one of these 4 men took her. Because
none of them really match the descriptions.
And he actually said on the stand, none of them took her. He saw the man that took her. Right. He said it looked like my cousin Richie. It wasn't Richie, but his body type looked like Richie. And that is just mind-boggling to me. And so it's really hard for me to get, Holly Bobo was a 20-year-old nursing student who got taken from her driveway while she was about to get in her car to go to school. Why she didn't get in her car and go on, I mean, obviously something kept her from doing that. But her family went through absolute hell. And I think it's possible that they were so removed from the situation that it never registered with them. In order for Jason Autry's testimony to be true, they had to have been coming over there to teach Clint Bobo how to cook meth. Now, I did find something out. At the end of Dylan's situation, he made a statement right before he was sentenced to like 35 years that Clint Bobo didn't have nothing to do with it, which again contradicts Jason Autry's testimony that got Zach Adams put away for life plus 50 years, which, by the way, up until after the verdict, Zach Adams was on trial and the death penalty was at stake.
Correct.
And the Bobo family agreed to life plus 50 years instead of allowing the sentencing phase to go on to the judge.
Right. Well, so for those of you who haven't followed that case closely, now's a great time to dive into it. There's lots of YouTube channel fodder for that. I will say, I think that you said something to me. You were like, why would they do all of this? Because things are coming out now that like the TBI plus the local agencies that were a part of the task force, essentially, I don't know if it's ever declared an actual task force, to, find Holly Bobo because she was missing for a very long period of time. And then to punish those responsible, have had like a lot of infighting. There's been a lot of gossip that's gone on. But it turns out that some of those things are accurate. There's a lot of information that was withheld from the defense. And that's not Meg and I just swallowing the defense's side of this. That's like what they're bringing into court, where they're showing us ATM videos and how Dylan Adams was coerced into having conversations with law enforcement. But probably the most interesting part of it to me is you developed a pretty perfect working theory as to why the TBI was behaving that way. And at first I kind of blew it off, but then I sat down and started like reading through documents. And the bottom line is there's been this guy that did it. And like, there's no other way to say it than like, of all the people likely to have abducted, raped, and murdered Holly Bobo, there was always a single predator that fits what you and I know about single predators. And this being a single predator crime.
And he also fits Clint Bobo's description of who took his sister.
To a T. He doesn't right this second, like if you were to pull him up and look at his mugshot or to...
At the time, he did.
Right. Yeah, this guy's on parole. He's out walking around. But what happened that was so bizarre was this guy was supposed to essentially be on trial. So if you time it and you like look at the window of time in March and April around when this happened to Holly Bobo and she disappears, he was supposed to be on trial for an attempted rape. And the person who was the prosecution's witness, some people call them the victim, my preference is the prosecution's witness, in that case was incarcerated at the time and was not retrieved to come to the trial. So ultimately, Terry Britt, the person who abducted and killed Holly Bobo, could have been like, it all could have been prevented if the local agencies and TBI had done their jobs back then related to his assault of a woman named Tequila Jones. Tequila Jones was incarcerated at the time. She was not brought to court. So ultimately, TBI, the local court, and the other folks involved here are responsible for what happened to Holly Bobo. And that's why the investigation has sort of taken a turn. Not because they did some overarching conspiracy to cover up for themselves, but because early on, like their own agents were like, hey, this might be on us. And at least one of them was pointing out that like they have a very clear predator that has the background of someone who would do what had been done to Holly Bobo. And they shut him out. At least one of them got shut out. The local district attorneys had like a lot of turnover during the time, to the point that a special prosecutor who had no idea what was going on was appointed. And the reason we have these little missteps in that case that result in ultimately the conviction of Zach Adams and multiple other people, but to a degree, the suicide of Shane Autry, one of the suspects, like, it's all because they let someone very dangerous off the hook through their own ineptitude. And that case, one, I never thought I'd be like sitting here talking about it again. Two, it is disturbing on every level.
It is one of the worst. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say just how poorly this was investigated and then prosecuted. And it's almost political. It's not political, but like in terms of local politics and local nonsense, it's almost like people passing the buck so that they don't get in trouble for how awful and egregious all of this is. And they just continue to do it, to the point in 2025, several of them were doing it on the witness stand, knowingly at this point. Like, at this point, the best response for someone like Judge Jennifer Nichols sitting on the stand would be, look, I thought I was doing my job. I did not do a very good job in this case. This case deserves some kind of review, and if you're going to give it a new trial, give it a new trial, do whatever you want to do. The reason I did it was X, Y, Z. And she did not do that. She had the opportunity to do it, and that makes her a piss-poor jurist in my eyes. And I will not ever be able to have a different perspective on her.
She should not be anywhere near the justice system in any capacity whatsoever. She shouldn't even be a defense attorney.
Yeah.
She is a, and I don't typically say this, she's a terrible person. If it's true, like what you're saying, now it's been my position, she may not actually know, but if it really is her, if she really knows and she's continuing this, she's a terrible person. And she's had lots of opportunities to say I was wrong, which she was wrong. Don't get me wrong, she was wrong. But she has chosen pride over the truth, essentially. And those are people that don't need to be in any position within the justice system, in my opinion.
I mean, I agree with you. I don't have anything better to say about like her problems there. And I think the pride part is, I think it's accurate. The biggest problem with this case is that, like, somebody has to be the one eventually to tell the Bobo family that there's a problem.
I feel like my explanation, like putting aside Dylan's, like, Dylan doesn't know what he's talking about. Okay.
A lot of what he says sounds okay, but it's really just word salad from someone who's cognitively impaired.
And he's repeating things. Okay. And Dylan he's a good old boy who literally wants to make everybody happy. Like, if he's sitting there talking to TBI agents, like, he doesn't want to make them mad. He wouldn't want to make anybody mad, right? He just wants to say whatever it is to get them to leave him alone, essentially. And based on all of that, I think if the Bobo family could just wonder to themselves, well, if they weren't there to teach Clint how to make meth, why on earth would they have been there? And there's no answer, right? There's no reason for any of those boys would have been over there that day. They wouldn't have even been there to teach Clint how to make meth.
No, that's everything that came out of, unfortunately, everything that came out of Jason Autry's mouth was absolutely made up according to the discovery and the evidence available.
And it's not just not believable. Doug Bates did an excellent job during the post-conviction relief hearings, demonstrating the miles per hour someone would have to be traveling to, in fact, be able to accomplish what Jason Autry was saying happened versus what the 2G phone tower records indicate happened back then. And we're talking about like 1,000-mile-an-hour travel. Like, he was really able to debunk it that far, which is kind of, I mean, I didn't do the math necessarily, but it's been done by several people. And it just, not only was it improbable, it was impossible. And nobody bothered to do that during the trial. The other huge thing that came out during the post-conviction relief, and this will be my last point in this little summary of it. During her closing, Jennifer Nichols said that the .380 bullet found next to Holly Bobo's skull was ruled out as causing the defect in the back of her head, which allowed the .32 pistol retrieved by the TBI a couple weeks before trial started at the behest of Victor Dinsmore as the murder weapon. However, the size of a .380 shell in a shell casing, the casing was found, the bullet was not. But the size of a .380 bullet is 0.55. No, 0.3. What is it?
I don't know the exact dimensions.
It's 0.5. What did I say? Okay. She said the .380 was ruled out, and that's not true.
Right. And so this is a casing found where Holly Bobo's remains were found.
That would not fit the gun that they said was the murder weapon. That's another thing people can't keep up with, and I can't either, honestly, but I do get the gist of it. The gist of it is that is the bullet, that is the casing of the bullet that killed her, and it was not ruled out.
Right. And the gun is locatable. Like it would take some effort at this point because it's been so long. But like that gun, at least if you want to trust some of these people that we're saying are liars, has been identified. Its owner is identified. And spoiler alert, it's Terry Britt. And the location of that gun is currently someplace that if they really wanted to solve this case, they could go and get it. But right. I don't know that gun being found actually wraps this up the way it would just give some credence to something someone said.
That's it. Really?
Yeah. So this is one that like, it's one to watch. It's like, there's a lot of different YouTube outlets that have kind of pieced together what's happening with it. But I know, like, I'm interested in how that goes in the new year. It's fascinating to me that the guy that did that, Terry Britt, is out walking around at this point because he did go to prison for a long period of time. Like, between the abduction and murder of Holly Bobo and now, like, he's out serving parole for all of what's gone on. He and his wife both got into significant trouble over firearms. But the end result of all of this is you've got these kids who, don't get me wrong, they were like slightly older juvenile delinquents. They were meth heads. They were addicts. They were doing all sorts of things they should not have been doing. They were not abducting, raping, and killing Holly Bobo.
And this is actually a case that I have avoided because it is so complex. And all I want to do is scream like, oh my gosh, you people are so stupid for believing this. Except I don't really want to do that because it just makes people shut down. It's just the complexity of it is so hard to explain. And I noticed even like just recently as the post-conviction relief hearings ended, I noticed people are saying Zach Adams needs to just do his time. He's guilty as sin. But that is the overall attitude of like the responses I was seeing. And so to me, how would I ever explain it to them?
You can't. And like, so it's so funny to me, the last year and change, I went back and started sitting in a courtroom pretty much every day or working for cases that would be in court shortly or be settling out. It is fascinating to me because I thought this attitude had died. I remembered this attitude. Last time I was really dealing with it was about 2014. But now, 11 years later, I'm back in the court system. And the attitude was so it sort of starts like this. People think when a news article pops up, oh, well, they've arrested him. He must have done something. Or her. It could be her as well in many cases. The next part of that problem is you have defense attorneys and prosecutors who go through all of the motions that are required, per local jurisdiction and local court rules, where they are deciding how to proceed with a case, whether it should be a good plea deal or a trial. Most of the plea deals are pretty atrocious, even if you didn't do it. You want to take the plea deal because you don't want the expense and the wasted time of the trial. And then you have judges' attitudes, which is they're here before me in court, so therefore they probably did something. The jury's attitude then becomes, well, they're here in court, they're showing us all these things, so clearly they must have done something. And then the prosecutor and the judge's attitudes become, well, if we're missing something, they'll find it on appeal. And then the appellate court's attitude is, well, the district court and the superior court found all of this to be good, so we're only going to review these particular pieces. And then the Supreme Court, either at the state level or if you move over into the federal court, the different attitudes kind of change. But most of them are, we're only really reviewing this to see what you've already done. So I say all that to say the criminal justice system is pretty clearly broken in a lot of different ways. It gets it right far less times than it gets it wrong. It's there to, protect us and enforce the law and to make sure people are punished for doing bad things. This case is an egregious example of how all of those things come together and basically mean we're spending an incredible amount of resources, an amazing amount of time to come to a conclusion that has nothing to do with what happened in the first place, to punish people who are not affiliated with whatever was going on. They had done other things that were able to say they did these other things. And that's enough, to basically put someone away for the rest of their life. And that's not how the court system's designed to work. This is just one example of it. There are so many cases I've seen where someone pleads out to something, and the cases you're never going to hear about are the cases where a murder has taken place. I've had 4 of these this year. They plead to some level of lower murder, and people who did nothing get a 12 to 20-year sentence for simply negotiating future freedom. And that case is marked as solved, it's marked as adjudicated, and it's taken off the books. And at least 2 of them, I know that they did not, quote unquote, catch and punish, end quote, the people who are actually involved in the homicide. Those people are out walking around. And that's the case in the Holly Bobo case. Zach Adams is definitely doing time. A lot of other people have gotten time off of this case. But ultimately, the guy who did it, he got slapped on the wrist for something else. And I say that, and, he did do some time, so there's that. But he did time for a completely different crime. And ultimately, he's out walking around, even though he's on post-release supervision now. I'm not convinced that he is yet old enough to not do this at least one more time. So that means the state of Tennessee is once again going to be on the hook for potentially at least an attempted, if not a completed, abduction, rape, and murder of another young girl.
That's what I was going to say. Just wait until he does it again, because then it's going to be really obvious it was him.
Yeah, because he has not broken his patterns. The crimes that he's accused of, they have some variances in how they're committed, but ultimately his signature, his motive, his MO, they all remain the same. And Holly Bobo fits those because Holly Bobo was always a single predator perpetrated abduction, rape, and murder.
There's no question. The interesting thing that I thought was, now that I have seen the post-conviction relief, I feel like he didn't think Clint was home. And I think the reason he killed her was because he became aware of all the law enforcement activity happening so quickly.
Yeah.
Because Clint saw her being abducted, he thought he was going to have more time.
Yeah, we've looked at it from that perspective. We think something about
Clint's truck was in the garage.
Right. We think something about how quickly there was a response to this young woman being missing. We think it maybe accelerated some aspects of it. Like, I don't have a really clear picture in my head, but I agree with you that that's likely why we end up where we're at.
I know we're finishing talking about this, but I actually do have a clear picture because the way her phone traveled and then it sat for like 30 minutes before it traveled on to be thrown out. Like, she died during that 30 minutes.
Gotcha.
Which was less than an hour after she was taken.
That's crazy to think about. But I
mean, really is.
Ultimately, this is wrapping up 2025 and we're moving into 2026. This is a great rabbit hole to go down if people want to go down one and just see like how like bizarre a murder case can turn out in terms of the court part of it. And like, you know, I am very cognizant of the fact that there are like relatives of the victim here that like have an emotional investment in the outcome of this case. I just, while I'm cognizant of that, I still have to look at it and go, you know, is it okay to be emotionally invested in an outcome that had nothing to do with the truth or reality?
I think that a little bit of it is coping mechanism. I think that it's a, well, quote, prettier, end quote, picture for Zach Adams to have done it than for Terry Britt to have done it.
Yeah.
Because Terry Britt is like the boogeyman monster.
Yeah, he reminds me a lot of BTK, like in his physicality.
So much worse though, because BTK, I mean, he was like masturbating over his victims. There's no telling what Terry Britt did to her.
Yeah. I don't have a lot more on this right now. I'm sure it's going to come up again in the future, especially after we get some kind of ruling in this case. I'm sure there'll be an episode on the ruling and kind of going over. I have a feeling I know how it's going to go. I think that I think I would go a step further than it's going to go. I'd be shocked if he doesn't get a new trial on the back of all of this because of how glaring it's been.
Oh yeah, if he doesn't get a new trial, I think he's going to get a new trial, and I would not be surprised if the charges against him are vacated and dropped by the judiciary. Now, I have heard professional attorneys say that like the judge doesn't have the authority to do that. So
I think this judge could do an order in a way that like precludes the prosecution from, or let's remove the word preclude. I think the judge in this case could make it clear in his ruling that the path forward doesn't really involve Zach Adams. And it should come from the fact that like the evidence as it's laid out, you can look at it one in two ways. Either the contamination from the investigation and sort of the missteps by TBI, local law enforcement, and the prosecution have so tainted this that like there's no way like to keep moving forward. That's my opinion on all of it, having like watched all of this testimony. You could also look at it from the perspective that like we need to take all of this back in court and put a jury back on it. I think the first one is the better perspective because at this point, I think you should focus on Terry Britt. The reason I say that is because of that future harm that Terry Britt has the potential to do to other people.
Right. That's the scariest part, right?
Yep. That's the scariest part for me.
Oh, I was going to ask you. I do remember Judge Bates asked for sanctions, and couldn't sanctions in the form of sanctions for Brady violations result in the dismissal of the charges?
It could. That's something the state could actually appeal, though. Whereas, I mean, yeah, there's a couple things that like are sanctionable here in the testimony that I've seen. There's a couple of things that the jurist overseeing this, the current judge, could do to throw out or to rule out future use of a number of sort of BS pieces of evidence. I don't really think the state would choose to go forward without Jason Autry. And I don't
He's
think
not
you
going to
can use him
testify
again.
again.
Right, but I don't even think you can use his previous testimony. I think it all becomes hearsay, and I think it all becomes unusable unless I'm missing something in the local rules in Tennessee. But ultimately, I think it should all be tossed. That's why I was saying, like, I would take it one step further.
Well,
And I don't know if he has the authority to do that. Most of the talking heads talking about this case, it's kind of like Delphi. Like, Delphi was like the other thing that we could have talked about because there was a conviction in that case. And there's this very split true crime industry divide where a subsection of people think that it's all this crazy theory that guy didn't do it versus like people who think that like it was all wrapped up in a nice bow.
that's another one of those not today Satans.
Yeah, like that's a case that like I have a theory there that's like separate of everything where potentially they got the wrong guy in Delphi. But like when I look at it all, I don't feel the way I feel about the Holly Bobo case. Like I think ultimately probably the disaster of a case that Delphi is, they're probably at least in the right direction. I could be convinced otherwise. Like you could bring me something to show like there were other people there or something and like I could change my mind on that case. I can't change my mind on the Holly Bobo case because and I said it this way, I'll say it this way again. These four idiots have one of the idiots among them. And this is his description, not mine. He basically just described his day, which is totally believable. And when they gave him the discovery, he, being kind of a felonious con artist, incorporated into his day the events they wanted to hear about. It's fiction. He acknowledges that it's completely fiction. What was believable about it was like he told a little lie, he told a little truth. He told a little lie, he told a little truth. It's very difficult with someone as practiced as he is. And he is an admitted addict. They are all admitted addicts. Addicts are good liars.
Well, and something a lot of people don't know about Jason Autry is he's tried to hang himself several times since he gave the false testimony.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's like, it's crazy, like how many people, as you said, like basically are saying, you know, shut up and sit down, Zach Adams, do your time. I mean, would you say that if it was you and like you had some kind of problem that had led to the situation? Because
I wouldn't say that if it was you, anybody. I just wouldn't do it. I avoid it or I go all in, right?
Yeah. And like, I am definitely all in on the idea that Tennessee got this very, very wrong. And that like a series of missteps have been made that like, this is a disaster. Anyway, I've now like, you wanted to do like a chat type episode, and I have now dragged all this nonsense into it. I apologize for that, but it's what you and I have been talking about in the real world out there as we segue from 2025 into 2026. Did you have anything else that you want to say right now about it?
No, just the only thing I would say is I wanted to recreate the trial and not recreate it, but rewatch it and try and go through and explain certain things. And I put that away because it was like going to be so much work and the backlash was going to be like too much for me, I thought. Yeah. And then for the post-conviction relief to keep going, I didn't know it was continuing on. I listened to the oral argument with Jennifer Thompson and the state of Tennessee before the Tennessee Supreme Court. And she didn't do a great job. And I was kind of like, well, there goes that, right? Because I knew based on the oral argument, I didn't feel like it was going to go anywhere. And I sort of it's one of those injustices that I don't feel like I'm going to be able to do anything about in my time, right?
Yeah.
And so I put it aside. And then the next thing I know is like closing arguments are about to be had in this other writ and PCR that they're having back at the trial court level, right? And I'm like, wait, what? And so it's a lot of legal wrangling that occurred. But I would just say to keep in mind that Doug Bates was appointed and he was appointed to represent Zach Adams, but he was appointed in the name of justice. Correct. Because the allegations were colorable enough to warrant this like re-examination.
Oh yeah. And so like we
is actually acting in the name of justice as opposed to trying to prove Zach Adams' innocence or prove the need for a new trial, right? He's acting in the name of justice.
Right. Right. And that's ultimately, you and I have wrestled with this particular case because like it's fascinating. Like it is a clear-cut example of a serial predator being caught in the middle of like his serial predation. And like they have him. And at one point, like not only do they have him like admitting in a coy kind of way, like, you know, it looks like you guys have it all figured out. Like I'll plead to whatever. And they never capitalize on like putting that case together. They do an awful lot of work to then kind of pass it off to the defense, which is unfortunate, to continue the investigation into what Terry Britt was doing that day and how it all worked out. And they find like holes in his alibi and problems, but they never really follow up on it. In fact, they chastise their own investigators for going down that path. And the only thing that you and I came up with was that it had to do with the Tequila Jones debacle that left Terry Britt back out on the street. But ultimately, this is the one, like if you guys want a case going into the new year that's not a brand new trial, and this has age on it. I mean, like the Holly Bobo case, I mean, ultimately, this all kicks off because Holly Bobo is taken from her driveway. And
April 13th, 2011.
Right. So we're 14 years ago. It's going to be 15 years this year. By the time this case is decided, I think her body is ultimately found in 2014. So it's like
September of 2014.
6 months. Yeah. 3 years, 6 months or so. And then we end up with, a verdict in 2017. And we have a lot of different actions taking place between 2022 and 2025. And we should have some kind of result from that in 2026. And I think that's going to be, it's a case that it has a lot of material, but most of the material, I'll go ahead and warn you, is just from the perspective that they got him. And it's wrong. And it's been wrong the whole time.
There's factual evidence. If you can think for yourself, you can look at the factual evidence and make your own determination. And it doesn't lead to the ending the state got.
Yeah. Yeah, it's unfortunate. I could talk about this case for days. You and I have tried to figure out a way. At one point, we had put together this. You described it pretty aptly. We were going to take the trial and break it down so people could understand it, and like what was going on that was problematic. But now you've got even more. I mean, I'm kind of glad we didn't do it. I don't think it was going to be well received, and in terms of like true crime audiences, they are very pro victim. And ultimately, Holly Bobo is the person that, you know, is at the center of all this. The person that you're trying to get justice for is her and her direct relatives that were affected by all of this. And it's difficult to get people to come across the mindset, like from it's an injustice to her to just put these guys in jail and call it a day.
Well, right. Not to mention the fact that once an innocent person faces death row and then is convicted by a jury of their peers, okay, which is what happened with Zach Adams, he actually does become a victim.
Correct. If everything plays out that you've done that to an innocent person, they are then a victim of the state.
But nobody wants to hear that.
No.
Nobody wants to hear that. And nothing about what's happening now with Zach Adams takes away from the atrociousness of the crime against Holly Bobo.
Correct. So that's all I got on this one for now. This has been an interesting chat episode. So glad that you're tuning in. The season 7 stuff will kick off in the next episode. And like I said, there will be a couple of repeats.
leading up to new things.
Yeah, leading up to new conversations and new elements of different cases. And you and I have recorded quite a bit to kick off the new year. You got anything else you wanted to say?
Nope, that's it. Happy New Year.
Special consideration was given to True Crime Excess by LabRottiCreations.com. If you have a moment in your favorite app, please go on and give us a review or a 5-star rating. It helps us get noticed in the crowd. This is True Crime XS.
You fall like the stars. I break things like guitars. Thick skin, no scars. We're in trouble, we took it too far. I don't want to go, but it's 'cause I'll disappoint ya. It's all I've ever dreamed of, something I cannot let go of. I hate the competition, this culture's like a gym, and I lost the motivation to get fit in your expectations.
True Crime Excess is brought to you by John and Meg. It's written, produced, edited, and posted by John and Meg. You can always support True Crime Excess through Patreon.com, or if you have a story you'd like them to cover, you can reach them at TrueCrimeAccess.com. Thank you for joining us.